We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bring news just for you. It's Friday, April 25th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and thank you for joining us on News Generation. Joining us today is Lee Won-bin.
Good morning.
Good morning, and we're delighted to have Christopher Gao back on the show. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again.
Great to have you back. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. So we're going to move on straight to our main discussion of the day. Friday means it's time to dive into topics with young people, resonating with young people around the world. Now, with wars always in the headlines and high global tensions, many countries are putting an increased emphasis on security. While war has always required manpower, many countries today are facing this new challenge. That is, they simply don't have enough young people willing to serve. So today we are going to look into this issue and also explore the reasons why. So starting off, Christopher, let's begin with the status quo. So what exactly is going on?
Right, so earlier this year, I would say the kind of background to this is that the prevailing sentiment in Europe has been that President Trump has essentially blown up the transatlantic alliance, like he sidelined the European countries in the negotiations with Russia and Ukraine over the peace talks. And so I think there's a sentiment that they need to rearm by themselves in order to guarantee their own security. So essentially, they have been launching these programs like the Readiness 2030 plan, where they're pledging up to 800 billion euros in order to rearm for themselves. So I think Europe is trying to pick up the slack that the US has left, and now more than 2/3 of European countries are actually meeting that target of more than 2% of GDP on defense spending. But despite those gains in this renewed push, manpower shortages remain a significant obstacle to Europeans and other countries kind of taking more of an active role in their own security. So for example, apparently Germany has a stagnant active duty force at around 180,000 troops, even amidst this push for increased recruitment. Another example in the UK, apparently only 10% of respondents to a survey said that, and this is among the Gen Z demographic, only 10% said they would be willing to enlist in the event of war, and that's down from a half since that was in 2004. So apparently, declining willingness to join the military is one problem, and I would say another big problem is the kind of fitness to serve. So in America, apparently only 23% of people are meeting the Army's like physical, moral, and emotional standards. Educational standards among the 17 to 24 age group. So we're dealing with an increasingly narrow group of people who are able to serve in the first place, and then on top of that, people are less willing to serve in general. So apparently, I will say the U.S. has counteracted this decline in enlistment rates somewhat through this program called the Future Soldier Preparatory Course. So they were able to increase the amount of enlistments from 44,000 in 2022 to 55,000 in 2024. So they're making some inroads there, but I do think that the long-term demographic trends are kind of posing a big problem for recruiters. There's just simply not enough young people to fill these ranks.
Right. So first of all, not enough number of young people, as Christopher mentioned, and also a growing sentiment of unwilling to serve for their country. So to help us better understand public sentiment around this issue, we're going to introduce you a survey on the willingness to serve during wartime. So Won-bin, please walk us through the findings.
Sure. So I think Chris just gave us a really good overview of the current ongoing situation of declining conscription list. And I brought a data to share. So last year, the international polling agency Gallup did a survey asking people from different countries if they would fight for their country. The result of the survey gives us some points to discuss throughout our show, and let's take a closer look at the stats.
Okay.
In Armenia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Georgia, more than 80% of the answers was yes. On the other hand, we have Japan at 9%, Italy at 14%, and Australia coming in at 20%, USA at 41%, and lastly, South Korea at 46%. Excuse me. Now, as you can see, something noticeable is that most developed countries, like European countries, have a very low rate of positive answers. So yes, all below 50%. And personally, I'm also surprised that South Korea only came in at 46%, considering that we are a country that is still in war.
Right, because when we look at the countries that have a high percentage, we can see that they were in the 80% range, as you showed, but we've also seen countries in the 10% range and South Korea in the 40% range. So now I want to hear more from our panelists. If your country were at war, so we're going to start with you, Won-bin. So if war resumed in Korea, are you willing to take up arms? What's your take on this?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. So as someone who proudly served my military service in Korea, I think it shouldn't even be a question. To share my personal story as like a background information for the viewers, I voluntarily served my military service in the JSA, which stands for Joint Security Area, or Panmunjom in Korea, which is the only portion of the Korean border where North and South Korean soldiers face each other. And it serves as a site for political meetings and negotiations. For the viewers, you may have encountered it in news. It's the border with the blue buildings. It's also very popular for President Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting as well. And during my service, I personally witnessed and experienced the tension between North and South Korea. And one thing that I can confidently say in front of everyone is that freedom is not free.
Right.
Korea's peace is being held by hard work and sweat from soldiers in the army 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even in night times. And this is me being very concise. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough. And therefore, as a young man, as a young Korean male who has a strong, healthy body, I'm fighting for my country. And because that's how South Korea existed until today. And honestly speaking, like, would I be scared? Yes. Would I rather stay at home and be together with my family instead? Of course. But someone has to protect this country. And honestly, I'm more than honored to serve my country and fight to protect my people and family when the time comes, if it does. And now into the conditions, I hope that the government can come up with a program that can properly compensate either financially or socially to the soldiers that participated voluntarily to protect their country. And honestly, that's the one thing that I ask from the country.
And we're going to talk a bit more about that in the later part of our show. Okay, now to you, Christopher, what do you think?
Right, so to the question of whether I would, take up arms if my country were at war, I think it definitely depends on what kind of war we're talking about. So I think in the unlikely event that China or Russia were to invade the, United States and if the homeland were under attack, I think I would be prepared to take up arms. And I think a lot of young people my age might also feel a need to defend the homeland in that scenario. But I do think, a lot of the things in the public discourse today, like talking about, making Canada the 51st state or taking Greenland for the resources, or like a war with Mexico to get rid of the cartels. Like, I mean, these are the things that our Americans are hearing in like terms of how the military might be used. And I don't think I would be interested in participating in a war of that nature. And that, is nothing to say for, kind of imperialist wars in the Middle East. I think a lot of young people in America, and I certainly would not be prepared to fight for resources like oil in the Middle East. So I think it definitely depends what kind of war we're talking about. Defensive war, I would take up arms, but other kind of useless or pointless territorial disputes, I wouldn't do that.
So it will depend on the scenario or the conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so to hear more opinions, we're first going to bring in a Korean millennial who voluntarily enlisted in the military. We'll be right back after a short break.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search our channel Arirang News. Click Community and leave a comment down below. Make a new type of news with us.
We are welcoming Korean millennial Woo Hee-jun to our show today. Welcome, Hee-jun.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So we're gonna start with our very first question for you. So we know that you voluntarily joined the military, even though you weren't required to, because only able-bodied men in South Korea are required to do their mandatory military service. So our big question is, what really drove you to take that path?
Well, I come from a background as a professional athlete and also the daughter of the police officer. Discipline and serving having always been a part of my life. So both words taught me the value of the sacrifices and commitment and protecting the others. So watching my father put on his uniform every day and serve with the pride had a deep impact on me. So even though I wasn't required to serve, as you said, and also required to enlist it, but I felt like a strong internal drive to contribute to my country in many ways.
Right, so thank you for sharing your personal story. Now, as you know, South Korea is still technically at war, and if a fighting or a war breaks out, are you willing to take the part in the fighting and join the war?
Well, without hesitation, big yes. There's a commitment I'm already made it, so not just once, but continuously. even after completing my active duty service, I choose to remain in the reserve officer. And so I'm currently undergoing this training with no legal obligations to do. So simply like because I believe in the being ready, service doesn't end with the a discharge date. It's a lifelong mindset, I guess. So it might complete me. I will be there and I'll be trained for it and I will live for it. So I'm kind of prepared for that.
Do you want to ask a third question,
Right,
Chris?
we had one more question for you. So South Korea is among several nations facing a shortage of military personnel. So in your view, how can this be best addressed?
Well, I believe we need to redefine how we view the military services, not just as an obligation, but as an opportunity to grow and lead and contribute to something greater than ourselves. So by enhancing support system for the service member, I guess providing better educational and career pathway and during or after their time in the uniform, and also sharing more stories of the positive service experiences, I guess, and particularly from those who choose this path voluntarily. So could also inspire a new generation in other ways. But I hopefully that with the right mindset and policies, we can overcome this challenge. And also, I truly believe that with the right visions, we can foster a culture where the more people want to serve, not because they have to, but they are proud to.
Definitely. All right, Heejun, thank you so much for your time today and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're now going to dive a bit deeper into the reasons why more young people are seemingly unwilling to serve in the military. So starting with you, Wonbin, why do you think young people today are less willing to fight for their countries, even at a time when national security is at stake in a lot of countries? Oh, sorry, I'm going to start with Chris.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I can speak to the American perspective a bit. I think perceptions of the military have gotten worse in recent years in America. I think there's been a politicization of the military that kind of runs parallel to the broader kind of polarization in society as a whole. But I do think under Trump's first term, he did kind of, say he was going to use the military or the National Guard to squash protests he didn't like. And I think a lot of Americans saw that and didn't like the idea of participating in some kind of anti-democratic, use of the military like that. I will also say more broadly, the perceptions of the military might not be as good, or the perceptions of, serving in the military might not be as good because of this, the forever wars in the Middle East that America was participating in. So we had 20 years in Afghanistan. We failed at nation building there, and Americans are, maybe not seeing how these wars strategically benefit the United States. And, that's nothing to say for how that benefits, how that helps their life, personally. I would say another thing, there's a lot of increased competition in the job market. So the civilian sector, there's a lot of companies that offer a lot of benefits now that were things that only the military used to provide, like tuition assistance and loan assistance. Now a lot of corporations are providing those benefits, and it's just like, well, why should I go to the military when I can get these benefits at a company where I'm not putting my life at risk in that way? And I think to that point, we can also see what modern warfare is like so much easier now because of the social media, because of GoPros. It's like, I can see these Ukrainian soldiers, running from these FPV drones.
Very graphic images and footage, right?
And there's nothing you can do in that situation. I think that seeing that brutal reality up close and, instantaneously almost in some cases, I think that's really reinforcing this, why would I want to participate in something like that as a young person? So I think that's increasing or declining morale is probably in part due to that, I would say.
Oh, right. So declining morale due to both domestic and international factors.
Right.
Okay, then I think you'll be able to give us another opinion, Wonbin, because you're currently based in Korea. What do you think?
Yeah, so for Korea, it's definitely a bit of a tricky question because in Korea, serving the army is necessary for most Korean men. So it's definitely a bit of a unique case compared to the most of the other countries where they do not have mandatory military service. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm someone who believes that it's the citizen's sacred duty to protect their own country. But even someone who has a strong belief like that, like me, also agrees that joining the army is very distant from being compatible with modern society, as it completely stops us from our academics or career for a full year and a half, or basically 2 years. And if we're talking about a war, the risk only becomes higher. Now, because of this disparity and the growing trend of individualism in Korea, a lot of MZ generations are not accepting the fact that serving their country is a basic duty for them. However, like Chris mentioned, this is not only a problem in Korea.
Right.
It's happening around the world. It's a global phenomenon. And to give another illustration, the middle-aged group in Russia still believe that the poverty and the national threat is coming from the Western countries, whereas the younger generations who don't have the Soviet perfume constantly debate about the necessity and the justification of war, leading to a number of anti-war protests in Russia.
I see. So for a more global perspective, we also wanted to hear what our viewers think. So we ran a poll on our Arirang YouTube channel. We asked them, would you be willing to fight for your country if war broke out? And if not, what's your biggest reason? So the options were number 1, survival comes first. Number 2, I'm against war and violence. Number 3, I don't believe I'm obligated to sacrifice. And number 4, other. So if we look at the results, 44% of those chose not willing to fight, said it was because they're against war and violence, followed by survival comes first and no duty to sacrifice themselves. We're also going to take a look at 3 comments left by our viewers. Our first comment for this Friday is by DKFM1077. The idea of defending your homeland is often a myth. War won't remember your name. It will leave you with scars, loss, and trauma. Even if by some miracle you survive, it changes everything, your body, your mind, and the world you once knew. Corn8857 says, because I'm against war, but it could depend on the war. Our final comment, RKZLTV, it depends on whether my country is the one attacking or being attacked. If it's the aggressor, I don't see any obligation to take part. So we could see various opinions by looking at the comments of our viewers. So before we move on to the final question of our discussion, I would like to briefly ask our panelists your thoughts after reading these comments and also looking at the results of the poll.
So it's definitely did change compared to the past. And I do think it's understandable. I can definitely see where this is coming from, because if you kind of look at the modern history, the younger generations, the MZ generations, or the ones who are in their 20s and 30s currently, their life was very distant from any kind of war or very serious conflicts, except for the Russian-Ukraine war that happened recently. And for us, war is something that's only in the history or history book or the movies, and it's something very distant from our real life. And if we, even for Korea, if we would have to go up to our grandparents or sometimes our parents to meet or see people who actually have experience in the army or during a war. So as the world becomes more stable and the economy becomes more developed, I think it is a natural situation where people feel less responsible, or they feel very defensive when it comes to fighting for their country or joining the war. So I think it's definitely understandable.
And do you also relate to these findings, Chris?
Yeah, I think those findings make a lot of sense, especially those comments and the distinction between defending your homeland and being the aggressor. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's understandable why people would feel that way. I will also mirror what Wonbin said earlier. I do think that the fact that our generation is removed so far from conflicts like World War II or the Korean War or Vietnam in the case of America. We don't have, an uncle or a parent who might have served in the military, but go back only 2 generations or so in America, and it's like, everybody had a dad or an uncle or somebody who fought in World War II, and so that's a big difference, and we're just we're that much more removed from people who actually served, and so we don't really see that level of sacrifice, I guess, on a daily basis. So that could be a big reason for this change in stats.
Absolutely. And ending off, this is actually a topic that really hits home for many of us around the world, especially as the world feels increasingly unpredictable. So I want to ask our panelists, after our discussion today, any final thoughts related to today's topic?
Yeah, so I did mention this in the beginning, but I think compensation and respect will be the most important factor in modern world in 2025.
That's what Heejun also mentioned too.
Yes, yes. And like Chris said earlier, right now it's an era of information and individualism. And all news, stories, information and footages are accessible and shared instantly. And most people, unlike the past, most people won't just blindly join the war when there's nothing foreseeable other than years of fighting in combat with nothing in return. And I think in this part, Korea is actually doing a pretty good job since they've been increasing the salary of mandatory service soldiers for the past few years. However, in the case of war, a much bigger guarantee or a benefit must be given. And just to be clear to the viewers, I'm not saying that the country paying the soldiers or the people will just make things even or even things out, but I think it's the minimum guarantee that the country can give to the ones fighting for their country, so they can have the pride and the motivation to protect their country, and realistically, less worry about the post-war era and their family.
Right, because they are putting their lives on the line when they're
Absolutely.
participating in warfare. And what are your thoughts, Chris?
Right, yeah, I totally agree with that last point there by Wonbin. I really think that the incentives need to be changed for people participating in war, like in order to compete with the civilian sector, which increasingly provides more benefits to people, which are competing with recruitment. I'd also say I think we need more support for veterans, so more mental health care and things like that, in order to support the people who actually put their life on the line. And I think the lack of those systems in place are also a big problem. I will say one other thing. I do think that despite the survey data, I think when push comes to shove, people will probably participate in a war when their country is at risk of being invaded or in some kind of territorial conflict like that. There's a lot of historical examples, like if you look at when North Korea shelled Yeonpyeong Island back in 2010, there was a huge surge of enlistments, and to the point where the Marines didn't even know what to do with all the new recruits. And so I think when push comes to shove, people will participate. And if you talk about things like, okay, there's a limited conflict on the Korean Peninsula, and let's say North Korea collapses, and then the reports are that China's swooping in to occupy the Northern Territory. Do you really think that young Korean men will just sit idly by and let that happen? I think
I'm putting my uniform on right away.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in those situations, people will absolutely step up to the plate. So I wouldn't put too much weight on the survey data, but it is relevant and it should be looked at for sure.
But hopefully none of those scenarios will happen, because what we really hope for is no war in the world.
Absolutely.
All right, and that's all we have for today, but NewsGen will be back next Monday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. Special thanks to Wonbin.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, and Christopher Gao.
Yep, thanks so much.
Thank you, and to our viewers, thank you for spending time with us, and we'll see you next week. We are News Generation.